Good evening, Zambia. Good evening, world. Mwaisen pomkwai, chunglu pomkwai, mzuile chwani. Mzuile should be, I don't know the other stuff, but I know mzuile chwani, mulibuti, mulibwanji, muliuli. Thank you for joining us on the Thursday night chat with PilAto. This is the first episode of this discussion episode series that we started today. And on this platform, I'll be inviting people, interesting people with interesting ideas and thoughts on a number of issues. And so today, I'm privileged to be hosting Mr. Musaba Chailunga, who is a very interesting mind. And I do hope that as you watch and listen, you find time to also ask him questions and experience his minds and perspectives on a number of issues. I met Mr. Musaba 4 years ago. We were both in Germany, and the little time that we spent together, I found him very interesting, and hope that I hoped and prayed that I could bring him to a Zambian audience. Mr. Musaba is very much Zambian, but is a Zambian export to Canada. Mr. Musaba, good evening. And welcome to Thursday Chat with PilAto. Thank you very much for accepting to be hosted on this platform. Good evening.
Good evening, PilAto, and everyone in Zambia. And good afternoon for those who are watching from this side where it's only 13:02.
No,
but
okay. So
I'm excited to be here. Yeah,
we're very happy to have you on this platform. So before we get into the conversations, the topic that we have this evening is the IMF and development in Zambia. So since the government of Zambia announced that they had reached an agreement with the IMF, there's been interesting conversations in Zambia, both from economists, pedestrians, farmers, taxi drivers, and artists, and every other Zambian has had an opportunity to share their thoughts on the IMF and the question of development in Zambia. I'd like us to first of all understand, for those that are meeting you for the first time, for those that are knowing you for the first time, tell us about who you are. Tell us who is Mr. Musaba Chailunga, and tell us why you feel we need the IMF if we do in Zambia.
I mean, for those that already know me, it's a bit boring, but for those that, of course, may be meeting me for the first time, I was born in Lusaka, but didn't grow up there. I grew up on the copper belt in Mufrila. My father was a miner working in Chambeshi. I went to Twampane Primary School in Kankoyo, then Butondo Secondary School. I contemplated becoming a priest, and I wanted to be a Franciscan father. For those who understand how Catholics work, they have denominations for priests. And the reason I wanted to be a Franciscan father, because I realized or learned that they are the ones that focus their work on the poor. So when I went to grade 12, I applied. I didn't apply to any college or university, so I applied to enter the seminary, for which I was accepted. But at that time, I'd changed my mind not to go to the seminary. Later, I joined National Hotels and worked at the Intercontinental Hotel. That's where we did the training. They were training like management trainees, but I fell in love with the kitchen, right? So I said, "Oh, I'm gonna be working in the kitchen." They made us choose, right? Some people in food and beverage, so I went to the kitchen. From there, with the help of family, I went to the United States. There I studied business, although I wanted to go and study catering, but something happened that there was a delay in the way the program was being arranged, so I switched to business. Now I was supposed to transfer back, right, to what do you call this, to catering. But it was at the time when information technology was coming up. So I switched to, after attending the State University of New York
Mm.
at Kenton, I switched to information technology and did computer programming. So for the last 20 plus years, I've been working as a software developer. But in the process, my interest in poverty elevation, and I grew older, I began to understand what really creates, what causes poverty, and how poverty can be solved, and how other countries have done it. I find it's more ideological. And through that process, and through my business background and my computer background, I wrote a book called Object Oriented Development in Africa. And that's how I met with you in Germany, because someone invited me to come and speak there. And then from that, I figured just people reading the book is not enough. Now we have an institute where we have to train people in rural and community development.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. You have a relatable background or story for so many Zambians today. Some of us thought that I always dreamt of becoming the first Zambian to go to the moon when I was growing up. I don't know what happened. I didn't go to the moon. I don't know where I went in instead. So I would like us to start this conversation from understanding, what do you think is Zambia's problem? You have, like you said, you've studied a lot of other issues, uh, poverty and what causes poverty. What do you think is Zambia's problem?
I think Zambia's problem is similar to most problems in Africa. I believe that the problem in Zambia is purely ideological, right?
Mm,
It has nothing to do with race, tribe, or where the country is located. It's purely ideological, and there are many factors that support that argument. Except most people don't really understand what that means when you say
mm,
it's ideological. Say, for example, I subscribe to capitalism, the free markets, right?
mm,
Um, and I think that if you look around the world, right, even
mm,
where people are exactly the same, right, uh, the most developed country
mm,
and the country that gives out aid is the country that follows free market economies. Um, and the best example you can use where you have everything that is exactly the same is, say, Korea and Germany, right? Um, uh, before, um, uh, at one point, the northern part of Korea was the most developed until the war came and they split. The north went communist, the south went capitalist, right? And the north, sometimes they are famine. The west, I mean the south, which is South Korea, has seen all these advances. You see, and then another problem is that people actually don't uh, understand the difference between socialism and social programs. You see, they think free education is a socialist program, not a social program. And
mm,
a social program is a government service that is paid for by countries that have money,
mhm,
usually. And that's why most people would point at Canada, where I live, which is usually in the top two countries of the best countries to live in the world, with sometimes Norway. You can put uh, Australia there, and probably most of the Scandinavian countries. Most people think those countries are socialist. Those countries are not socialist by any definition, right?
Mm.
Now, what is capitalism? Capitalism, most people relate it to exploitation of man by man because that's what was being hammered in us at the time, maybe of the Cold War and when UNIP was in power. But that's not what capitalism is. Capitalism only a means of production. And the sooner we realize that it's only the means of production, and people have to produce wealth that get taxed and then gets redistributed to help the poor to pay for services, then we are going to move further. But as long as we continue fighting and just debate things for the sake of debating, we are not going to go anywhere.
Mm. So that's some super thoughts. If if our problem is ideological, and going by what you have indicated, would you confidently say that Zambia is and has been a capitalist country, or would you call it socialist country? What's our subscription between the two ideologies that you've highlighted?
You see, Zambia has seen um, metamorphosis, and then at the same time, there's there's a way you have to understand how market economy or free market or capitalism works, right?
Mm.
But to start with, when you talk to most Zambians, they will tell you that forget the political disturbance or political non-freedom of
Mm.
colonial governments, right?
Mm.
Most people tell you that during Welensky, things were better, right? And things were better because Britain is capitalist, right? Zambia was being run as a capitalist country.
Mm.
When Zambians talk about Zambia, the best bet of Zambia during independence, it was when Zambia was actually a market economy. You see, the first 3 or 4 years of Zambia's independence, Zambia was not socialist. It was a multi-party democracy with a market economy. That was when Zambia, if everyone was going to talk about the best Zambia, that was the best Zambia, right?
Mm.
Um, and that's the money that Zambia had to even do some of the programs they did, of course, with World Bank financing in the 70s. The
Mm.
problem was we started nationalizing private entities. When you do that, you start losing innovation and you stop attracting investment, right?
Mm.
So that's what happened. So most people, of course, don't want to look at it this way. They just look at the calendar. They just say, oh, when this person was president, this is what happened. We don't look at what caused it. In the 80s, right? I told you I grew up in Mufrila. There was one time I made a post, I think, on Facebook, and someone told me, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You have never been through this. In 90s, something, the MMD privatized mines and people lost jobs. But my father lost a job when before ZCM was privatized, right? A lot of people were retrenched, that's what they call it, or laid off in the 80s because ZCM was running out of money. When I grew up in Mufrila, I remember I started having friends that were speaking Kaonde and Luvale. How did
Mm.
I get those friends? These are friends that were moved from Kalengwa. Kalengwa mine was closed. The argument then was that there was no copper in northwestern province,
Mm.
and families were being moved to the copper belt, Karulushi, Mufrida, Chambishi, to redistribute people. Today, northwestern province is one of the biggest copper producers in Zambia. Why did that happen? As a socialist under UNIP, we stopped attracting investment. So another example I can give is that people talk about Botswana. Botswana is the same people. There's no difference. What's the difference between Botswana and Zambia? Nothing really. The people are the same. We speak maybe different languages, but if you put a Swana and the Zambian in a room and they are not saying anything, we won't know, right? But why is Botswana with the best economy in our region, if not the whole continent? Because it has a market economy, right? People will tell you leaders are not corrupt. That's a lie. Leaders are corrupt everywhere. In the US, in the UK, in Japan, people can be corrupt.
Mm. So what's thank you for that analysis of the problem. I wanted to find out because I want to understand. So after the Kaunda era, we got to the MMD era, to where we are now. What would you say we've been? Have we been capitalists? Have we been socialists from after Kaunda?
You see, it's a bit confusing because the MMD made some errors. They had good intentions, but you see, it's like if someone thinks if you get married, everything will be fine. Like say for example, if you get married, you have children,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
People who are old enough and who are married, they understand that it doesn't work like that. There are
Oh, yeah.
certain steps you take to start having children, right? It's just
Mm.
getting married is not enough for people to have
Of
children.
children.
Now, the MMD believe that privatization is enough to um, to make mines better or to improve productivity and profitability,
Mm.
which in essence is true. The problem is that they did it without local content. This is why, for example, if you look at my book, I mentioned local content. It's very, very important. Um, when you look at the US, for example,
Mm.
right? The United States, they are always talking about taxes. Corporations always find a way not to pay taxes,
Mm.
right? And governments try to incentivize their businesses not to pay taxes or to make them pay less taxes. There is this argument about taxes. What is a fair amount of tax? However, all that said, tax is the smallest component, right, as a unit of revenue from a corporation, right? The most revenues come from, and I mean when I say tax, I mean corporate tax. The
Mm.
most revenue comes from income tax of the employees, right? Or the ownership of the what do you call this? Um,
Pay
I
as
mean
you earn.
the revenue, the money made by the owners of the corporation. What do I mean by this? If, say, for example, Zambia was 50% owned by Zambians,
Mm.
say, for example, the Zambia trade union workers, say the teachers pension fund, Zambia State Insurance, NAPSA, if that group controlled about 50% or 30% of the mines, and then individual Zambians, it doesn't matter. Maybe you own $100 share, or others own $1,000, but all that aggregates to about 50%, right?
Mm.
You are going to see that Zambia would not care much about taxes. Why wouldn't they care much about taxes? Because when profits are shared, they are being shared with the Zambians,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And then when those Zambians get that money, whatever is described, whether it's salary or um, or investment return, Zambians as individuals will pay taxes on that as compared to a corporation as a whole. You see? And this is why, I mean, it's a very difficult concept to grasp, but you can see that in the US, you would see that Jeff Bezos or Amazon paid zero tax, right? We've seen that. Amazon paid zero tax, but Amazon has 100,000 employees with an average income of about $50,000, right? And these $50,000 average income, people are paying 20 to 30% in income taxes. So the government, whether it's the local government or the province or the state government or the federal government, they have every interest to ensure Amazon does not collapse. Not because they are making money from Amazon directly, but because one, Amazon is keeping the people employed. They don't have to worry about giving them social welfare. Not only that, these people are now paying taxes on the money they make from Amazon to the government. Now, this is the structure we need in Zambia. See, this is the structure we need in Zambia. Zambia as a country, the way it is, there is so much minerals in Zambia that we can start mines from the scratch and set up in this manner where the ownership is predominantly Zambian. And we wouldn't have to worry about royalties and taxes the way we do now, because we can actually generate enough money from the mines that will be new and created. The same way Lumwana or the new mines generate money more than the old mines did.
So that's very interesting. I don't know if I understood this pronouncement, but I'll try to see if you probably heard of it. There is some sort of tax uh, that's being proposed by the government of Zambia, where they, I don't know. Okay, let me try to see if I can remember that. I'll get back. I'll get us back to this conversation on taxes. I'll have to check what that clearly indicates. But I think there's something that the government of Zambia, through the Ministry of Finance, have pronounced on the taxation system or taxes concerning the mines and other investments in the country. I would like to get to that particular pronouncement so then I can get your thought on that. Do you think at any point Zambia needed the IMF bailout? I asked that because we had the previous government had spent about 3, 4, 5 years negotiating with the IMF, asking for 1.4 or 1.5 billion US dollars as a bailout. The new government succeeded in getting that agreement with the IMF, and we are told that we will be receiving the money somewhere in June. Do you think we needed the IMF bailout or loan as a country?
Any organization, whether it's an individual or a business or a government, they need cash flow, they need money. Now it depends on what you do with the money when you get it, right? And then IMF money usually is concession. It's one of the cheapest. Now, one of the things I don't understand now is that Zambia practically owns very little or nothing. In the past, IMF conditions were such that for us to be able to recover money, right? ZCCM or state insurance or certain state corporations will have to reduce workforce, or they will have to close down so that you raise money like you generate the revenue to be paying off the other debts that you have, including ourselves.
Mm.
That situation, we are no longer there, right? Because um, as we all know, the Lumwana is not Zambia mine. All the mines in Zambia are not Zambian, so IMF has no say there. So when Zambians are afraid about the same thing will happen, what's going to happen? You see, um, the only thing that's going to happen is the credit rating. Now, if people remember during HIPIC, when the HIPIC happened, of course, we can't relive this, but what HIPIC did was that when Zambia debt was wiped out, Zambia's credit rating started going up.
Mm.
And when Zambia's credit rating started going up, Zambia now could go out and borrow from the markets. That's how the MMD were able to get the first Eurobond. And when they lost government, and I think PF got two Eurobonds after that. And these are the bonds that we defaulted on, right? Because now our credit rating is bad. And I remember there was one time when people were saying, there was reports, even I think Bloomberg and some Yahoo Finance reporting about how Zambian bonds are the best performing in the world. And at the time, some PF supporters were excited. We're talking about how haters won't like this because Zambian bonds are the best performing. But a best performing bond is in reverse because the lenders are making more money on it. You see? Now, there are people who are saying today that why not go get money from the markets? Zambia, with the history of default that we did earlier this year, means that if we are going to go to the market, someone might lend us money, but the interest rates will be much higher, right? So the IMF is actually helping us to actually like stabilize the ship, right? Like to what they call stop the bleeding, right? And in the long term, now we have to understand that people have to do what they say they are going to do. Okay. So if you ask me, would I support IMF loan? Yes, I would. Do I support it now? Yes, I do. Right. However, I'm not the one managing it. You see? Now, this is true to any loan, whether it's IMF or not. So the people that are saying we should get money somewhere else, right? They are also not going to be the people managing it. So the question is not whether we borrowed the money, but whether it was used for what it was intended to. Now we have to trust that the people that are running our economy are going to do what they are expected to do, right? Me, I don't usually go back and change what I say because and I like supporting things when they are not really very popular because I have to follow what and it's not just for the sake of supporting it. I have to support what's right. That's why even when PF was in power and people were talking about debt, I was saying debt is inevitable, at least for a country like Zambia. Now, this is one thing most people don't also realize is that the people, let me give you an example. In Zambia, most people have workers, right? At home, domestic workers. There's not a single person in Zambia now who can lend their employee 100,000 kwacha, their maid or their garden boy. You know why?
No.
Because they know there is no way these people are going to pay back. Now you have to look at that from the country point of view. Why are these countries interested in lending Zambia money? Why is China interested in lending Zambia money? Why is the IMF lending Zambia money? Right? Because most Zambians don't realize that the Zambian economy is bigger than say $1 trillion. Our friends can see this. The Chinese can see it. The Americans can see it. You see, we can't see it. You see, that's why we are worried about, oh, look at 30 billion debt. You see, these people don't spend sleepless nights when they lend us billions because they know they'll get it. They know Zambia has it. The question is, do we know we have it? That's the question. That's the question we should be asking ourselves. And the moment we realize this, trust me, the problems of Zambia will change.
If I like that thought, very provoking. If you were speaking to the Minister of Finance, if you were speaking to the president of this country, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, what is one thing that you'd say to them concerning the IMF loan that would see it becoming a successful attempt at recovering this country, this economy?
I think for me is that I believe when they went in with a story, right? And they have to stick to that story, because if you go in with a story and the people lending them the money, they agree with the story, that's why they lent it to them. And that's why people like me are supporting it, think it's a good idea to do it, because I don't need to know what the story is, but I know that concession loans are needed when you are struggling, at least to bring you up, right? Now, when you do this, remember, I also support free enterprise, right? So there are people that want government to do everything. You see, in the process, while all this is going on, government has to be very open. Government has to be supportive to small businesses or Zambian businesses. We have to promote indigenous ownership. You see, it's not just a question of having private businesses. They have to be Zambian businesses. It's not just a question um, of saying that we are going to develop we are developing the country. Like, it's pointless to get $10 billion in loans and give $10 billion worth of contracts to foreign countries, to foreign businesses, right? Then we have done nothing. What is needed is that if you borrow money, a billion, $2, $3 billion, you have to make sure at least 80% of that is given to local contractors. They have to build the roads, they have to build the bridges. Now, I have friends, some very educated, way more educated, and these people, they are the same people that argue that Zambians can't do it. That is not true, though. You see what I mean? It is not true. Now, the reason we see these problems in Zambia of how you award the Zambian business a contract and they do a shoddy job is not because it's a Zambian business that didn't know how to do the job. It is how the contract was awarded. For example, if I'm at Ministry of Local Government and we are going to build, say, 1,000 houses, they don't say, let's get Zambian businesses that have been building houses. What they say, oh, register a business. They get a person to register a new business and they give a contract to that person. So they have no history of having done anything like that. So the problem is not because they are Zambian, it's how they did it. You see? Now, there's a second part. The second part is that for me, even if a Zambian business builds a bridge and it collapses, right? The next bridge has to be built by another Zambian. If it collapses, the next bridge, we have to build at least 10 bridges, and the 10 bridges collapse, and all the contracts have to be given to the Zambians. we are not losing money. Don't worry about money. Money is not that important here. What we are doing is that we are building ourselves up. Trust me, in the US, things collapse. When NASA tried to send a rocket to space, the first one exploded, and the second one. Same with Elon Musk. His last successful launch for SpaceX, if that had exploded, it would have gone bankrupt because the previous ones exploded. If you look at China, almost every day they are pulling up people from the rubble. But the Chinese don't say, let's start giving contrast to the bridge the Chinese have failed. No, because we have to go through the process of learning. You see, how are we going to know we can do it if we are just going to say we failed, right? We have to trust ourselves and give us jobs to do.
There is a school of thought that insists that instead of getting a loan from IMF, we could have generated that amount of money from within. So some of the ideas, sources of that money, that we could probably introduce a tax in the mines, in the mining sector. Mining companies can give us that much money. We can borrow from within, from local business and all of those things. Do you think where Zambia is, do you think borrowing or introducing new taxes would have been a better route compared to borrowing money from the IMF?
There's nothing wrong with the IMF. I don't see anything wrong with the IMF. If you look at...
But do you think borrowing money from within the country or by introducing new taxes in the mining sector would have been a better option compared to borrowing money from the IMF?
That can still be done. It's not one or the other. You see, taxes still have to be collected. Mines still have to pay the taxes. Right? But how long does it take to get those taxes? If you look at the government borrows money domestically by issuing treasury bills. Right? What are the interest rates on the treasury bills? They are very high.
Yeah.
Right? They are very, very high. Now, would you rather borrow get a cheap loan from the IMF or get money from the local at a very high interest rate? Now, at the same time, I think the economy, and this is what, for example, I disagree when I'm speaking with our economists, right? Especially in Zambia. The economy is very broad. It's very, very complex. You see, different money gets used for different things. Zambia needs more money than the money Zambia got from the IMF. You see, I tell people that in Zambia, if not a penny was stolen, whatever corruption, whatever you believe that money gets stolen, and whatever you believe is the rate of tax mines or anyone who should pay tax should pay, right? If every person who's supposed to pay the taxes, including the mines, paid their taxes to the penny, and if every government worker or government official spent the money exactly the way they are supposed to spend it, the money still won't be enough. It won't be enough. So the problem from there, and I did this through my own research, right? Why do I believe this? Because, like I mentioned, I live in Canada. Canada has 3 levels of government: the local government, local governments, provincial governments, and the federal government. all these level governments have deficits. If you look at the United States has 21, maybe $23 trillion deficit, budget deficit. They are in the hole. They owe $21 trillion. Zambia owes $30 billion, right? Why is this the case? This is the case because you have to understand the more we improve, teachers won't want to be paid 5,000 kwacha anymore or 7,000 kwacha anymore. And in fact, it's only in the best interest of the country that teachers, doctors, nurses, and the police are paid well. Where is this money going to come from? You see, we need all this money. And I'm not talking about people that work from private companies because the money is not coming from government, but just the nurses and all the private workers, right? For them to live well, they have to be paid well enough money, right? Where is that money going to come from? If you take the money people are complaining about, right? Say anyone who says we can get money from anywhere, right? They can do wherever they are sitting. If you're listening to this, just think of a number. Right now, you think of a number that I can raise this money for Zambia to do something. And then you spend that money you've raised in your own mind on salaries. See if it's enough. Then you realize that it's a more complicated situation. Zambia is going to owe more money than it does now. Eventually, in our lifetime, our debt will hit at least 50 to 100 billion. So we shouldn't be worrying about Zambia being $30 billion in debt. That's not even a problem. Problems are something else.
Okay, so let's take this time to read what the people are saying. Some of them are asking questions. Some of them are sharing their thoughts, agreeing and disagreeing with you. I'd like to take some time to read through what people are saying. So this one is coming from Ntimpa KC. Ntimpa says, PilAto, IMF is a club and they come with harsh rules and conditions. That's been our concern in Zambia, and it's been that IMF conditionalities are against the poor people of this country, and those that keep mentioning and talking about this insist that going to the IMF is a betrayal of the poor people's interest in this country. So Ntimpa is saying, PilAto, IMF is a club and they come with harsh rules and conditions. What is your reaction to this?
It's like there's not enough time to go through this. Like when people believe something, they believe it, right? Say for example, I'm from Chilubi Island. My mother, my father were born there. I have cousins and relatives there, right? What will be their state without IMF or with IMF? Is their condition still the same? I would say it's still the same. It's still the same. It won't change. So when people talk about conditions, like I said, in the past, we had state-owned corporations. We had Indeco, we had Zimco, we had all these companies that IMF said, you have to do ABCD. You have to privatize. Again, privatization is not wrong, according to me, right? Or at least to people that subscribe to market economies. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just how people understand it. Unfortunately, the way the MMD did it made a lot of Zambians not like the IMF. Now, let's look at the United States. In 2008, after the economic meltdown, what happened? They had austerity measures. Companies closed down. People got laid off. Millions, about 20 million people lost jobs. Did those conditions come from the IMF? The person who asked that question, he lives in New York.
Ntimpa, yeah, I think he's a friend of mine. I think I know Ntimpa.
Yes, he lives in New York. right? Right now, under the COVID conditions, a lot of people lost jobs in the United States. You see, economies to recover, they have to do certain things. The only problem that we have is that we believe that these things are being imposed on us. We don't believe that these are decisions we have to make on our own. Once you believe that it's a decision you make on your own, you don't worry about it. For me, doing that is a personal decision. Privatizing a mine or having a private entity is a decision I believe governments in Africa have to make. It's not the IMF condition. It's my decision. So I'm not afraid of IMF, right? Or whatever they decide. However, there are certain things we have to do after these things happen to make things work.
This guy says, Sam Pachungu Jr. says, Botswana is the only country in Africa which doesn't get an IMF bailout package. It also lends out to other countries instead. To what extent do you agree or disagree with Sam Pachungu Jr.?
I agree with him. I agree with him totally. You see, the thing is that it's not, you see, people miss the point. People miss the point totally. If you remember where I came from, say, for example, at independence,
Yes.
if Zambia did not nationalize the mines, you remember what I said? Didn't I mention Botswana?
Yes, you did.
If Zambia did not nationalize the mines, Zambia wouldn't be needing the IMF today. You see? If Botswana did not nationalize things, Botswana has open market economy. Now, we have to also consider that, as some people would put it, Zambia was involved in an independence struggle, blah, blah, blah. That's true. But that doesn't mean you could not trade with other countries. You see, we have to understand what IMF is. IMF is just a bank. It's not I don't know how to describe it. It's just a group of people that lend you money. You see? And if you have your own money, you won't be needing them.
Okay. Lumumba Malcolm says, for Zambia or Africa to develop, we must use what we have to get what we want. It's so shameful seeing that countries with abundant resources are the ones begging for financial assistance all the time. The crisis that Zambia and Africa has is leadership, because we only have presidents who only preside over things on behalf of the imperialists. But we need leaders who can lead through actions. To what extent do you agree with this or disagree with this thought?
He has so many comments in his question, and it's not easy to just like respond directly or indirectly. However, we getting a loan is not aid, is not getting begging. It's a loan, they expect it back. So we are not going out begging. The other day I put a question. It was a deliberate question. It sounded silly, but it was a deliberate. It had a meaning to it. On my Facebook, I said, anyone who has bought anything with a label made in Britain in the last 10 years, take a picture and post it on my wall. No one did, including people who live in the UK. They couldn't find something they bought in the last 10 years with a label made in Britain. You see?
What is the message there? That's very interesting.
The message is this. Most people do not want to look at the evolution of the global economy, where manufacturing is going to first of all, the cheapest markets, and with people with the most with the most aggressive work ethic, right? The president or the CEO of Apple said, we make our products in China, not because China has the cheapest labor market. China doesn't have the cheapest labor market. You see, they make it there because their labor market is cheap, but their work ethic is aggressive. You see, in Zambia, most Zambians, I can give you an example. I asked, anyway, I don't want to use this example because people might easily catch who I'm talking about. I'll use a different example. What I would like to say is that in Zambia, things are very expensive. In Zambia. And I don't mean just the imported things, the local things. You see? Now, because of that, production goes down. You lose jobs. You don't have jobs like that. And when you don't have jobs, you don't have taxes. And you don't have taxes, you have no government revenue. And when you have no government revenue, you have to borrow, right? Now, what is borrowing? Does Africa the only continent that borrows? No. In fact, Africa per capita has the lowest debt. In the United States today, per capita is $46,000 to $50,000 per person. That's how much they owe if you share their money, right? Their debt. Zambia is about $300 per person. That's not a debt you worry about. You see, the thing is, we have to change the mindset. In Africa, every time we are thinking, we see as poor people first. We see ourselves as poor people first than people who have something. And every time we go into negotiation with anybody from outside the continent, we speak to them as desperate beings, people who need help, including the people that are asking these questions. You see? We don't see ourselves as people who have something that we can trade and negotiate with. So that's another issue.
Okay, so let me pick another question. I think this one is coming from Sir Bright Weupe Chama. Is it possible for the country to pay all its debts? And if it's probable, how can we as a country work ourselves out of the debt?
Okay, but why are you worried about debt though? Why are you worried about debt? Why is debt so a big problem? Let me give you an example, right? You see all these billionaires we know in the US. No one, not a single billionaire has bought their house cash. Not one. Even if your house, do you know that?
I'm knowing now.
Even cars, ask Michael Jordan if you can. They don't own things cash. You know why? Because debt now is a commodity. You see, don't look at debt the way we used to look at debt years ago. Debt now is a commodity that is used to build wealth. And in Africa, we are being scared of debt because we don't know. Let me give an example. If you have $1 million, right, and you buy a house, let me put it this way. This is how someone put it to me. A poor person, when given $1 million, would buy a house, for example, for $1 million, and they own $1 million house and it's debt free. A rich person would use that $1 million and buy 5 houses and put $200,000 as deposit on each house and borrow $800,000. You see?
Say that again, please. Say that again.
A wealthy person who take
Yes.
$1 million and take $200,000 and buy 5 houses, right? And borrow $800,000 from the banks so that he has $800,000 in debt, in total 400,000, right? Not 400,000, is it 4 million? Is going to have $4 million in debt, right? Why is he doing this? Because when real estate grow, right, the growth is calculated on the total value. So if it grows by 20%, you are making 20% on $1 million, right? Which means your return on your 200,000 is greater. Now, I don't know if anyone followed this. If you have to listen to it, like you pledge to understand how it works. Now, the way it is that at the end of the day, the person who borrowed money to buy 5 properties would end up with more money eventually than the person who has 0 debt. You understand? And that's why, for example, government issue bonds. Because you have to have something to do with the money. The government, if you are issuing bonds just to yeah, so I think that's, I've belabored this point. So I think
Okay, sure. So this one is Malung Watson. Malung Watson is quoting Dr. Griff Chelwa, who is a good friend of mine. He says, Dr. Griff Chelwa writes, sadly and quite duplicitously, if you ask me, those advising the Zambian government, key among them the IMF, are making the argument that fiscal austerity is necessary to restore growth. This idea that austerity can lead to growth in struggling economies is known as expansionary austerity. Now, you don't have to be a genius to immediately tell that the phrase expansionary austerity is an oxymoron, a blatant contradiction in terms. How can an economy, it doesn't continue. Is there anything you'd like to add or subtract or respond to this thought, though it's not complete?
I know what he's saying, but I can say he's wrong. He's wrong. You see,
Why do you think he's wrong?
You see, most people do not even want to see what happens in other countries. And the sadly is that most people think Africans are being abused by the West. You see, there are certain things as Black people, as Zambians, we don't want to accept, but we believe inside ourselves. You see, that comment is an encapsulation of an inferiority complex. Total inferiority complex. If you look at the EU, when the EU was created, there were conditions they created for countries to join. Similar to IMF conditions. If you look at in Europe, there are countries called the PIGS. PIGS is Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, the southern countries. Sometimes Ireland includes, sometimes the I would include Italy and Ireland, right? These countries, for them to qualify to use the euro, they had to meet the standards required to join the euro that were set by Germany and France. Of course, Norway and Britain did not incorporate their currency, but the major economies in the EU were Germany and France. They set those conditions, and these countries had to comply. There are certain things you have to do to meet these things. We have to think of ourselves as good enough to fight and compete.
Lizwe Anthony Banks asks, tell us which country has ever survived through borrowing from IMF?
Which country has never survived? That's another question. Which country has never survived? You see, people think the IMF is new. The IMF was created to build economies after the Second World War. Hitler demolished France, demolished the UK, Germany itself. That's the money they used to rebuild. So what do people say these things? Why do people think if the IMF was only lending money to countries like Zambia or countries in Africa, they won't be in business? There are countries around the world that start using this money. I mean, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is all you need to develop. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you are hungry, right? If you are hungry, you have to stop the hunger first before you go to work. That's what the IMF is for. People need to understand what the IMF is for first. It's not for development. It's to, although it helps, but it helps you control your financial, create a financial stability, improve your credit rating so that you can go to the markets. Now, debt is a different issue. Debt is a requirement these days for development.
This guy says, this is Clint Sean. He says, I just feel the mines don't pay enough taxes. To Mr. Emirati was the best, or to Emirati was the best because it's difficult to dodge compared to deductible income tax. They just declare a loss, they know taxes collected poor way to manage the mining sector. I don't know if if that makes any sense that you can respond to. I don't think I understand what he's saying, but I understand the first line.
Yeah, I think I understand what he's talking about. You see, the thing is that it's an example I gave earlier, right? About it's not just, you see, in the modern economy, if you look at Google, Apple, Microsoft, or even oil companies, they have shelter havens, they call them. They register companies in, they headquarter a company in a foreign country, even though they are American, so that they can pay less tax, right? So basically, that's what is talking about income tax deductible, so that they can pay less tax. This part we know happens, exists. But there are two things to this question. One, we know Zambia can develop more mines than this. So our lesson really is not how much taxes we collect from these mines, but can we build other mines where the ownership, the biggest chunk of the ownership is indigenous, or at least local Zambians, people who have interest in Zambia, not just foreign owners. That would address the tax issue, even if they cheat on the taxes. Zambia can have some other revenue. Then two, Zambia should have maybe a mandate, a minimum wage for the mining sector. Here is another interesting thing, right? Where they were talking about energy, right? Do you know that if Zambia said to the mines, say, you won't pay any taxes, right? Don't pay any taxes, but you have to pay ZESCO the full amount for the power. There is no subsidy on power. Zambia can get more money from the mines than taxes.
Say that again.
If Zambia said, don't pay taxes at all, but you have to pay ZESCO the market rate for the power, right? Because if you look at how much Zambia subsidizes the mines, is more than what Zambia gets in taxes.
Ah, yeah.
You see?
Is
So
that what you would recommend in exchange for taxes?
no, I'm
Would you
not
recommend that?
recommending. I'm not recommending anything. I'm only saying why people give tax incentives, say in countries like here,
Mm,
the reasoning behind it. You see, because you know taxes they're gonna cheat, but a ZESCO bill they can't cheat. If they don't pay, you cut them off.
that's very good. That's very good. So I think we've run out of time. I would like to hear from your end. First of all, I would like you to talk about the book, your book, and how you feel it would be helpful, first of all, for mindset change in the country, and how you feel it would be a prescription to what we're going through as a country.
I think the book is about the way the book is about, say, focuses on market economy, including the development of rural communities, meaning that we have to focus on what we have first, which is the point most people brought up, right? Why do we have to borrow money, this and this? And I agree, right? But it's in this instance and in this situation with IMF, you can't say you can't when you're in this a desperate situation. However, generally speaking, Zambia has the capacity, each province has the capacity to do a lot more than we are doing now. Each province has, or each individual Zambian has to focus on something else more than uh, 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 taxing the mines, right? Let me give you an example. Most like the way people don't understand when I talk about free market and capitalism, right? When you go to Soweto market, when you reach Soweto market at say 6 a.m. or 5 a.m., you are going to find marketeers there, right?
Yes.
You are going to find some marketeers there. They will be there before 7 a.m., before the offices open, the official offices. Why do you think these people are there? Why do you think people wake up so early to go to Soweto market? You see, these people are doing this not because they love the people they are selling things to. You see, when you wake up at home to get the vegetables from the farm to take to the market, you are not doing it because you love the people who are going to be buying from you. That's not why you are doing it. You are doing it because that's how you are going to survive. That's how you are going to live. That's how you are going to feed your children. You see, that is what market economy is, right?
Yes.
So basically, when it comes to my book, that's what I'm trying to emphasize. It's already happening. There are people who are doing these things already. You see, when you look at people building homes, they are not getting instructions from the government or the president that build the house and build it this way. People are building schools, private schools. No one is telling them do this. They are just starting on their own, using their own ingenuity. They set their own prices, right? They raise their own standards. They do things, of course, within the law. And most people are taking kids from public schools into the private schools. For example, people are taking people from the um, um, public hospitals into the private hospitals. Why? Because the people that are doing these things are not doing it because they love their neighbor, but because that's how you provide a service. You have to provide it with excellence at a cost. Now, we are not saying this is the only thing that should exist. We are saying that now, when these people get taxed, the money that comes from there, that's what we use to improve the services in hospitals and public schools that other people cannot afford in the private sector.
Okay, Mr. Chailunga, two things as we conclude. So, in your concluding remarks, I want you to first of all give us your analysis of the new Dawn government, which is 4 months now. There's a lot of mixed reactions. Some people are saying the new government is doing well. There's another group of Zambians that feel I want to get your personal analysis or your grading of or rating of the new government. Secondly, what do you think you would recommend for street vending in the country? We have heard news stories that the new Minister for Local Government has instructed that street vendors should vacate the streets. What do you think should be a solution to that as a problem in the country? So on those two things, then we say bye to our viewers.
The first part is that it's very difficult. It's too early to rate the government. Most people use campaign promises, right? Or he promised, he lied, he did this. Now, most of the things that are happening now, for example, when PF was in power, I was very objective. And that's why I'm not saying the new Dawn government is lying or that something would happen, this, whatever, right? There were certain things I used to say that this, no matter what happens, they can't do it. It has to go this way, right? Like, for example, I mentioned that in the first 5 years of if HH wins or President HH wins, the first 5 years, Zambian debt will actually grow. It won't go down. That I stated before the elections. So that's why this issue of the IMF does not concern me, because it's something I knew would happen, right? When it comes to everything else, I'm glad they have decided, they have made these tough decisions early, especially on fuel and electricity, right? It's very difficult to explain to people now how it will work out. But I've been writing about this maybe for a long time, about why we need to remove these subsidies. People get used to it. Trust me, there will come, like I said earlier, there will come a time when Zambians will be making $1,000, teachers, $1,500 or $2,000 equivalent kwacha, right? Then they will stop worrying about these small things. But that's up to the president or the new government or the ones who come after to build on what is being started now. On street vendors, no one wants to be a street vendor. No one wants to be a street vendor. If you look at our economy, you cannot have the worst infrastructure, like the situation in Africa. You cannot have the worst infrastructure and the highest unemployment at the same time. You see? So it makes no sense. There has to be a way to employ people, and there are ways to employ people. You see, and another thing is, like, people have to be brave. I can give you an example. When the MMD appointed the Professor Chirwa to be managing director of Zambia Railways, he proposed.
That was a PF. I think it was PF under Mr. Assad.
Yes, I said MMD. Sorry, when the PF, he proposed to build a railway, and downtown Lusaka, he proposed was putting it down underground, And his proposal included building trains and coaches in Zambia. At that time, his budget, I think, was either 2 billion or 2.5 billion. The argument by people was that we don't need such luxuries. You see, a train going underground is a luxury for us, where we have so much unemployment. Now, this is, and some economists were saying this, Zambian economists, right? But you see, it's the concept of how people fail to see how you move from A to B. Because when you are digging underground, you are not just digging a hole and burying the money. Someone has to dig. You see? Someone who did civil engineering at Unza, or is it Copperbelt University or any university, has to do the design, has to get paid. Someone has to move the dirt, probably came from Kalingalinga, whatever place. I don't want to demean people from Kalingalinga, but any other place could be Kablonga, Woodland, has a job where you are digging. That's where the 2 billion is going. It's not going in the ground, it's going in people's pockets. You see? Now, every time someone comes up with an idea, no matter how grand it is, the fact that the poor cannot use it, they can work on it. You see? And this is what touches now into the street vendors. We have to find ways to create jobs so that people don't have to be street vendors. They can move on their own. But meanwhile, we have to create spaces for them they can operate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chailunga. It's always a pleasure talking to you. You always have provoking thoughts, and I do hope that my viewers found you interesting, and hopefully we can host you again and obviously to discuss more on topics like this and many others concerning Zambia. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, and thank you for your time, and thank you, everyone. I just want to leave one word. Zambians, we have to believe in ourselves more. We are better than we think we are. Thank you.
Sure.